podcast?
It's recording to the cloud.
Cool. Last podcast announcement, since we're on the topic, and this actually is relevant, is that our good friend who has been on this, or been on our CF as a guest speaker, Dr. Seth, launched his podcast last week, I believe, and he has 4 episodes that are all really, really great. I thought the Jody Mishuk episode was really good. And then Emily and I don't know when it comes out, but Emily and I recorded a episode with him that'll probably be out in the next week or so, maybe even today, who knows. But Core Formulas is the sponsor, so it was kind of really cool to hear our sponsorship go live on a real live podcast. Also, 2 announcements before we get started. Bowel Complete either has very little left on our website, or we could even be sold out. I didn't check this morning, but we are sold out of drainage essentials currently. So if you're looking for it, DSS should have, and does have, as far as I know, have stock of both of those. So if you need drainage or bowel, go to DSS, and then we'll have our shipment in at the end of the month. I think that's all I got.
Perfect. All right, so we have a PowerPoint for y'all. It's lungs and heart. And when we get to the end, I did not get this part of it on the PowerPoint because it's kind of sporadic, but I'm going to cover like some key things from a lung perspective that y'all might be familiar with, largely because either you have probably dealt with this, or I feel like men deal with a lot of lung things. And you have to kind of like think of sleep apnea, snoring, all those things that it seems like men tend to be more susceptible to. So I was just looking up like just some ancient medicine and underlying root causes of why that's going on. And so we'll kind of end with that and give you guys like, okay, what causes this? What are some of the remedies that support it and why? So anyways, that's going to be at the very end of the presentation. All right, so screen share. It's so funny when we decided to do heart and lungs together. I didn't realize until we started really getting into the research of it that they're so intertwined and connected. And like common sense, yes, we know that because when it comes to oxygen and the heart pumping, duh. But it is pretty cool when you look at how intertwined they are, how one reflects the other and vice versa. Allie, you want to cover this part, the structures of the organs?
Sure.
Okay.
So if you skip ahead to well, you don't have to actually skip ahead, but to slide 4, there's some other fun facts on here, but I didn't realize this, but your heart, I always love when there's fun anatomy things of your whatever is the size of your forearm or something, but your heart is the size of your 2 hands clasped together. And I was like, that is cool because everybody is obviously different. So that's how big your heart is, in case you wanted to know. And then we can actually just stay on this slide. I'll go over this stuff, but these are just kind of some fun, interesting things. Each minute your heart pumps about 1.5 gallons of blood. Your heart is a coordinated machine. So the right side pumps blood into your lungs while the left side pumps it back into your body. A woman's average heartbeat is faster than a man's, almost by 8 beats per minute. I don't know if this is scientific structural or if this is because women just think so much further ahead, and with all the things we're great multitaskers, not sure. Guessing it's probably more of a physiological thing. Your heart
thing about that is most men tend to be more of the hypertension, high heart rate side, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like they can't handle it, but their body's doing it anyways. Your heart has its own electrical supply and will continue to beat when separated from your body. Not creepy at all. Your heart is about the size of your 2 hands clasped together. I said that. People really can have a broken heart. Sometimes life situations can cause temporary heart failure. So we do have a full kind of section dedicated to emotions and trauma and all of that with the heart, because that is a real thing. Happiness and a strong sense of emotional vitality help lower your risk for heart disease. And then the last one reminded me of that call that we just did a bunch of random fun facts with animals and made me laugh. So I had to put this in there, that the blue whale has the largest heart, weighing over 1,500 pounds. Okay, so if we go back to the heart and structure, Basically what is the point of the heart? What is it doing? It pumps blood through your body essentially. So it's our primary organ of your circulatory system. So when Em said that the lungs and the heart are very, co-regulated together, the circulatory system and the respiratory system, those have a lot of connections as well. So your heart contains 4 chambers made of muscle and again, powered by electrical impulses. Your brain and your nervous system direct your heart's function. So if you go back to our nervous system call, you can kind of find a lot more info on nervous system and why it relates to the heart as well. Do you want me to keep going or?
I can slide.
Okay.
So this kind of is a really good slide that ties together how the loops interact with one another with the heart and lungs working together. So just like the interesting facts on here, I was like, wow, 100,000 heartbeats a day. To even think about that, and your airways, like with your breath, 1,500 miles and 5 quarts of blood pumped per minute, 15 to 25 breaths per minute. Now, if you have an Oura ring, I don't know if Whoop tracks this as well, but it tracks your respiratory rate. And so when you are overworked or stressed, your respiratory rate can increase because you're breathing more rapidly. You're not able to get as deep of a breath. And it's not necessarily like whose respiratory rate is better than another. You find your average, but your average, the closer you get up towards 20 and above, that's a little bit of a problem. So I find that kind of the range of 14 to 17 is a really good respiratory rate average. But if your normal's 15 and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, my respiratory rate's 17, that can start to mean that there's some inflammation going on in the lungs or the sinuses and a need for some sort of support. So if you look back on the connection little thing on the left-hand slide, you'll see that there's common problems related to the heart-lung connection. This could be things like exercise intolerance, fatigue, irregular heartbeats, sleep apnea, asthma, bronchitis. I'll cover a lot of those at the end of our call. Weak heart muscles, shortness of breath, or where people feel like they have air hunger, and heart attacks in extreme cases as well. So then you also have other symptoms that are similar to that of like hypoxia. Hypoxia is low oxygen levels. So if someone puts that little thing on their finger, it'll measure. You obviously want it as close to 100 as possible. So if your oxygen levels are decreasing, that's some sort of issue happening with the heart and lung. Chest pain, near fainting or fainting, fatigue, palpitations, and then in extreme cases, heart failure. So that is sort of how they are connected. Allie already went over that. So when it comes to the heart, because we're going to start with that, there's a lot of potential causes of imbalance. I mean, this slide could have listed probably 100 different things because so many things influence and impact the heart. You could even have, like, as an athlete, like trauma to the heart, getting hit in the heart, or dehydration, or you could have situations where there's electrical instabilities, or, there's so many possible things. So we try to condense it into like the most common. So at the very top is the psychological stressor, trauma, mental stress. There is a reason, and Allie and I were just talking about this. I just got back from Oklahoma with my family and had and every time this happens, I go and I spend time with family and friends, and I have the highest heart rate variability compared to my normal. And it always fascinates me because, you are relaxed, you're with your loved ones, you're surrounded by people in good community and conversation, and the variability of your heart, as it increases, it's showing that your parasympathetic nervous system is more in control versus the stressful fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. So one of the ways to track psychological stressors, mental stress, is heart rate variability, which is another thing an Oura ring can track. And we've talked about HRV in the past and kind of the numbers that you want yours to be at. Sedentary, poor diet. If someone does not exercise, that's going to put a big damper on the cardiovascular system. If they're eating a lot of processed foods, poor fat sources, not enough protein, that's going to influence the delivery of oxygen. It's going to cause atherosclerosis on the arteries. It's going to cause that pumping to happen faster, leading to a higher heart rate and faster heart rate, and sometimes arrhythmia or blood pressure. challenges, whether it's high or low. Insulin resistance. So this is a big one, and we'll cover this more in a little bit, but blood sugar directly influences the heart. And so when we're looking at that fasting insulin, we really want it 2 to 5. That's the optimal window of insulin. When we start getting out of those windows, it's going to put a stress on the heart. Any sort of inflammation, electrolyte mineral imbalances, we'll cover those more in depth in a little bit. Infections, this could be things like Lyme disease. Lyme carditis is a real valid thing. Bartonella can influence the valves as well. Mold, mycotoxins, those can influence the valves as well, and heavy metals. So here is a slide on insulin resistance. So both that and diabetes can cause heart-related issues. So this study to the left is just talking about insulin resistance and heart failure and the mechanisms of what's contributing to that. And so it's saying major factors contributing to the development of cardiac insulin resistance are oxidative stress, which oxidative stress is a really fancy word for there's an imbalance in the body and it's causing oxidation, which causes inflammation, hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, hyperlipidemia. This is excess fat in the body. We can look at our small particle size of our lipid molecules or cholesterol, triglycerides, that type of thing. Dysregulated secretion of cytokines. So when we look at COVID, for example, what was one of the most common things I said was an early predictor that someone may have COVID? Dysregulated blood sugar, because that virus may not lead to symptoms right away of a viral infection, but it goes in and attaches to these specific cells of our insulin receptors and throws off the signaling, leading to high fasting glucose, high blood sugar that's not as controlled post meals. And then obviously as a result, we then start to see the virus symptoms set in a few days later, because there's this cytokine expression, which basically it's a storm. It's causing too much, like rain is good, rain in excess is bad, it causes flooding. And so cytokine is a storm that comes in and sort of floods out the good stuff and causes dysfunction. And then it exacerbates metabolic function, endocrine function, and obviously insulin signaling. So then the picture on the right shows you what's happening. So you have insulin that's coming from the pancreas and glucose that's being secreted as well. And those are your blood basically. And so you have the insulin resistance type 2 diabetes at the bottom. And when you have a healthy system, you have a normal level of glucose in the blood. As y'all know, you go to get your blood work done, 75 to 86, it's in that window. It's a normal level of fasted. We want to kind of be below 100 for most of our day outside of that 90-minute window of eating. And then the glucose can be stored and used in our organs, whether that's the muscles. This is why taking in carbs post-workout can be so helpful. That glucose can be shuttled into those muscles that were squeezed out like a sponge. And then the liver. But when our liver becomes stored with too much glucose due to a sedentary lifestyle or stress, then it builds up in the bloodstream, and then we have excess insulin secreted because it's like, I need this glucose to go somewhere, and then the organs are unresponsive. The best way that you can think of this in your brain is if you go try to fill up a car with gas that's already filled, what's going to happen? The gas is going to spill out of the car. It's going to get everywhere. It's going to get on your car and all over the floor, and you just wasted basically all that money that you just paid, because that gas is glucose, right? It's fuel for the car. And so you have to drive the car, you have to move your body, you have to keep metabolism working and lift weights in certain cases if you're wanting to take in a lot of carbs so it can soak it up. Anyways, when you don't, your organs are then less responsive, which puts a greater strain on your heart due to the insulin response. 2 studies on stress. So last week someone said like, hey, every call we do, y'all talk about stress. And it's because it is probably the number one thing that influences the body. I had a call with a friend today and she was super frustrated because her family, and I can attest to this because my family's the same way. They eat whatever the heck they want. They drink beer like it's water. They don't take any supplements and they're thriving. Their labs look great. And I'm like, yeah. And they're probably in community and laughing and having fun and going on vacations. That's my parents. They do not eat well. They drink beer like it's water, but they have an incredible group of friends. They host events at their house all the time. We will pee ourselves laughing, just being around one another, games, cards, dominoes. There's always something going on, and their labs look great. And so stress plays such an important role in the health of our heart. And as Ali mentioned at the beginning, a broken heart can lead to a heart attack. So we know there's a direct influence. As sad as it was, that shooting at the school in San Antonio in Texas, the wife got killed in the shooting and the husband had a heart attack like the next day or the day after that from, that's not by coincidence. So it absolutely, broken heart can lead to cardiovascular events. So these just sort of correlate the heart rate variability component to that. The one on the left was a study done on those with PTSD compared to controls. And obviously they found that those with a history or present PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, found lower HRV compared to the controls, concluding that basically the altered sympathetic and parasympathetic activity does alter the variability and is influenced from stressors. And then the one on the right was sort of a connection that it was like a longstanding meta-analysis of HRV. I just thought my dog tried to get on my couch. He didn't. And they were concluding through this kind of full analysis as well. If you look at the very bottom, that there's even different mechanisms of like guided flex control over our behavior, peripheral physiology that helps us better understand even like how pathways in our brainstem activity and our autonomic response systems are influenced due to day-to-day life things like traffic, a job you don't love, being in a marriage that's not ideal. And then these two, similarly, just two other additional studies y'all can look at with stress. One was orthostatic stress, that's on the left, that's like a tilt test. They'll sometimes do that with people who they may think may have POTS, which is a nervous system disorder. And then they take the heart rate from laying down and then tilt it and seeing the response. You want the heart rate to go up, but in people with a dysregulated nervous system and stress, it will go the opposite direction, which is often why when people stand up from sitting down, they get really dizzy and almost faint or feel like they're seeing stars. So that's an orthostatic stressor. And then the one on the right was looking at how stress from things like smoking, again, job insecurity, occupational stress, among live fire instructors with insomnia as well, how that influenced and correlated with a decreased HRV. So physical events, lifestyle events, sleep style stuff, all impacting the variability of the heart. Here are two studies with Lyme and something called myocarditis or Lyme carditis, how Lyme actually can influence the heart. And we've had Dr. John Kim talk about this before with y'all. Dr. Steph has spoken on this because this is something she walked through as well with Bartonella. And part of the reason why Bartonella influences it, because these are both bacterias, they're infections, is Bartonella can infect the red blood cells, not only in the liver, but also in the spleen and the heart, where it makes fat deposits and actually can disrupt the heartbeat. Where I remember I was talking with Steph and she went into the hospital and her heart rate and blood pressure was like through the roof. And so they were able to find basically this infection, and she did the Vibrant Wellness Tick-Borne 2.0 panel. It's very expensive. I think it's close to $2,000, and it came up, it's probably the most accurate for Bartonella. It came up with this Bartonella infection, and she was in a hospital for quite a lot of time. So I love how, well, not love, I think it's frustrating that it says Lyme carditis is an uncommon manifestation of Lyme disease. I don't think that's the case. When you look at COVID in the past few years, what is the number one organ that's been impacted? The heart. And what are all these people complaining of? Brain fog. So it's these underlying infections that have been triggered almost, that have come to the surface and disrupted these heart valves and caused the irregularities of the heart rhythm. So those two studies are really good to look at if you want to look at more into it. Then it just talked about on the right-hand side where I studied that Borrelia, it's the most common tick-borne illness in the US. I don't agree with that either because it runs with the other ones. It's just that they don't have great testing methods for any of this. But I did find it interesting that it said one of the complications with carditis, which ranges between 1 and 10% of total Lyme disease cases, again, are they knowing how to test for it, occurs within weeks to months of the onset of infection. I also don't think that's the case because there's people that have experienced this that did not get bit by any mosquitoes. They did not have any tick bite. It was after COVID. And so, no, that did not come from like a week of the onset of the infection. It was coming up from dormancy. So it impacts through this disturbances of the AV node. So if you go back to that slide that we had in the very beginning, you'll see the AV node on here and how it influences the beat of it. Okay, leading to blocks. Yes, yes, yes. All right, so moving on to metals. And Lyme co-infections will sometimes cause rashes, but for most people, they will not. Bartonella is going to look like a cat striae. Sometimes people will blame them on stretch marks and say that they're stretch marks. It's not, it's Bartonella striae. But if you just go online and search like Bartonella rashes, Borrelia rashes, you'll see what they look like. All right, so heavy metals. The study on the left is the role that mercury and cadmium have on essentially the heart, myocardial type issues, and how it's influenced. Not going to read this super in-depth study here, but it's just correlating how exactly it influences the vascular smooth muscles, how it reduces ATP, how it depletes glutathione, it increases lipid peroxidation, oxidative stress. We talked about the protective mechanism of selenium even. So selenium, if we don't have enough, or iodine, our T3 uptake can dip below 28. That's a really good sign to look at your iodine and selenium status, because testing those in the blood is very difficult and it's not always accurate in the hair. Sometimes selenium can be accurate in the hair, but not always. And they have protective mechanisms against mercury toxicity. And so a lot of people are deficient in this very, very, very important mineral, both of them. And then it allows the mercury to come in and take the bus seats of our cells. If that happens, mercury has now diminished the protective effects that things like omega-3 has on the body, which is not great. So you're like, I'm eating all this omega-3, I'm taking all these phospholipids, but heavy metals are coming in and interfering with those receptor sites. And then it causes further dysfunction and obstruction. It affects and increases the blood pressure, which can be a direct correlation to heavy metal toxicity. Cadmium tends to impact the kidneys more. They've done a lot of studies with like cadmium and water, which we know water has to be processed through our kidneys with the water soluble toxins. And then it just goes in, talk about zinc, protective role of zinc, calcium, dietary calcium. A lot of people aren't getting enough of the good high quality calcium in their diet, which can cause a buildup of cadmium and lead even. So anyways, that is that study. And then the one on the right, I liked this one because it mentioned children as well in it. I think this would be a good one to go read if you're wanting to look up the role that things like mercury can have on heart disease. They also mentioned heart rate variability in this study. So they hypothesized that mercury will impact the cardiac autonomic function, that it can have a long-lasting effect on cardiac parasympathetic activity, and some evidence has shown that mercury exposure might affect heart rate variability, particularly early exposures in children. And if you look at, as sad as it is, most of kids' foods, Allie's done an incredible job of gathering like, okay, what are the best options for kiddos? Because they love to fill it with glyphosate and artificial ingredients and food dyes and natural flavors and heavy metals. Kids' food is some of the worst, and their brain is not even permeable or impermeable until 18 months of age. And so all that time, those metals can then leach in and impact the little baby and the brain, and food can be a very common reason alongside water and the air you breathe that it's getting into their system. And if it impacts the heart, then that impacts oxygen delivery. And then we don't have cognition. We have ADHD. We have the inability to look and like recognize, okay, that is a square, that is a circle, right? Because our brain needs oxygen and information. And if we're not digesting, we don't have information. And if we don't have proper heart rhythm, we don't have proper oxygen. So metals play a massive, massive, massive role in the focus and the attention of kiddos. Massive role. All right, so ancient medicine, looked this up, can't confirm if it's 100% true. Couldn't find any studies that reflected this, but I found it really interesting. So according to ancient medicine, the nose is the window to the heart and the lungs. Well, yes, duh, what we breathe in through our nose gets to our lungs, but had never heard that the nose was the window to the heart as well. So when you look at face mapping, where that shows up is the nose. So if we have a heart issue or a lung issue, you could see pimples, blackheads, large pores along the surface of the nose. So then people will just throw in a bunch of salicylic acid to shrink the pores, but that's a Band-Aid. So that's not fixing the underlying root of why it's there to begin with, why the glands are overproducing oil and causing pimples and blackheads. Small hairs in your nose, those can act as air cleaning agents. So a lot of times, my dog is snoring. He needs lung support. A lot of times those small hairs can be super protective in the same way that our eyebrows and eyelashes are. They're filtering out those large particles that would go in and get into the lungs. It also makes me wonder if someone with a higher toxic load, we know, can produce like thicker hair molecules. Like think about, and even PCOS, like there's thick black hair that can grow. If it's like in the nose area, you know, you see people and you're like, wow, they have a hairy nose. If it's almost like the body's way of building in its own cleaning system.
Like men, like really hairy
Right.
chested men. You're like,
Well, I don't know about the chest. I'm talking about the
no, I
nose.
know, but it's like the men that have the hairy chest, like also have the thick nose hairs. You just want to get in there
Yeah.
and with
Take
those
pluck
nose
it, trim it or pluck it. Yep.
things.
So yeah, this is why we love supporting the nasal passages, and why in our wellness guide that we have for y'all and resource kit, like we have all those supports for nasal rinses. And as much as y'all hate us for doing them, having clear nasal passages is so important. Breathing in good air, so important. When you travel, think about all the chemicals that are all the places. Having a nasal spray with you, so helpful and important. And why having like a home air purifier, Allie and I both have them, is so key, because you're breathing that in on a daily basis. That's going to influence your lungs and your heart.
Yeah, like one of the easiest things you can do. I forget who it was. It was the his name's Ryan something. He's like the home mold exposure clean test my home guy, Ryan. Anyways, he was saying like the basic most easy thing you can do to clean up the environment in your home is open the windows. I mean, yes, depending on where you live. And yes, depending on if it's like allergy season with pollen and whatnot, but opening up your windows and getting a really good cross breeze throughout the house is something so easy that you can do to kind of lower that toxin burden from anything. It's even like when you have the stove on, when you have like, I mean, yes, you can have clean candles and things, but it's still that particulate matter.
Yeah.
So opening the windows, taking off your shoes at the front door, those are like kind of lifestyle things that can ultimately affect your lungs and your heart.
Yep.
I had some random other stuff. I don't know if I should insert it now. I guess I can.
Go ahead. I got to grab my charger.
Okay. Well, I ran over to pull out my actual like textbook, which feels so funny because like who looks at actual books, but this is from the NTA. Or I guess we heard about it. It was in our course, but it's Signs and Symptoms Analysis, Functional Perspective. And they have a whole section on cardiovascular. And I always remember, and it's like with the one thing that like a sign and symptom that's so random, but can mean so many different things that I always forget. But air hunger can be one of those like multi-symptomatic or root cause things, but they have a bunch of different other signs and symptoms under cardiovascular. So I wanted to kind of go over that just real quick. So what they listed, I'm looking at this book with cardiovascular. So if you're aware of heavy or irregular breathing, discomfort at high altitudes, air hunger, or you yawn frequently, compelled to open windows in a closed room, shortness of breath, ankle swelling at the end of the day, cough at night, blush or face turns red for no reason, a dull pain or tightness in the chest, or radiate into the right arm or worsens with exertion, and muscle cramps with exertion, those can all be like tied back to cardiovascular type problems. But there's two different types basically that heart disease can be split up into, which I think is really interesting. So you can kind of decide which person you are. There's either a congestive type or a myocardial type. So a congestive type is usually characterized by low blood pressure and a craving for sugar. This person often feels bad or run down and gets sick, and they actually really need B1, so thiamine, so vitamin B1 need, and are generally thyroid types of people. The myocardial type is characterized by hypertension, so high blood pressure, a craving for alcohol, and they actually have a need for B2, riboflavin. They don't get sick easily and have lots of adrenal energy. So based on those two types, you can kind of characterize yourself. I'm curious, like, do you think you're a congestive type? Raise your hand. So that's the I was gonna say Emily's the congestive type, and I am the myocardial type.
Jamie said I'm type 1 too. And the second she said it, I said, yep, she's my twin. We both were the same person. Type 1 all day.
Yeah, so someone who, but that's interesting. Like, do you find that you are probably, I think, more drawn to B1?
Oh, absolutely. And all the symptoms of B1, if I don't stay on our B happies, I start getting all those symptoms of low B1.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Wait, can you say those types again?
Sure. The congestive type is characterized by low blood pressure and a craving for sugar. Often feel bad or run down. You get sick often. They need B1, vitamin B1, thiamine, and are generally thyroid types. Myocardial type is characterized by hypertension, so high blood pressure, a craving for alcohol, and a need for B2, riboflavin. Doesn't get sick easily and has lots of adrenal energy.
Okay, so now look at y'all's blood work, because if you are a type 1, you will tend to have the patterns for low hydrochloric acid, and your labs tend to be on the lower end of protein in the blood, like low protein. Not saying you don't eat protein, but those can influence and show you a need for B1, which is very, very, very interesting.
Yeah. And then a need for, what are some of the markers for B2? There's like a few.
I think that glucose is a big one.
Okay.
Confirm, because I know my type more than your type.
I know. It's funny because Asher is definitely, like, he was deficient in B6.
Iron and hemoglobin are most often affected.
Okay. Because yeah, he had a severe need for B2 all of a sudden on some other stuff. And I was like, interesting, of all the Bs. But
well, it's because mold and fungus and metals and candida use up your B2 faster.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting.
The biggest thing is iron, hemoglobin and iron for the type 2s. Type 1s are more of your need for hydrochloric acid, low protein in the blood. Yeah. It's not that low iron is B2. It's that the disruption of the iron panel, ferritin, TIBC, iron, it could be high or low, is more of a type 2 person. So, yep.
And then some of the other like things that I mentioned, like a blushed face, so some of the nutrient support. So a cough at night, this book will tell you, like, okay, if there's a cough at night, like check off these things. So they do supplemental. So the second indication would be B1 deficiency, and then other supplemental supports, which is pretty common for a lot of different cardiovascular things, but heart tissue, neonatal bovine, CoQ10, EPA, DHA from fish oil, and naturally occurring thiamine. The air hunger is one of those things that can be a need for B vitamins. So anyways, fun things with cardiovascular, the two different types of people, digestive or myocardial.
Yep. Did you already cover this slide?
No, these were just since we were talking about nose stuff, and this often comes up like in people's protocols. I just thought it'd be nice to add. So nasopure propolis. Oh, the only thing I was going to say, which I don't even know if we want to get into the whole conversation about it, but colloidal silver. There's going to be a lot of people who have different thoughts and opinions of it. I personally don't think it should be used long term. I think if it's an acute situation that needs handling and nothing else is working, I think colloidal silver is fine. I know, like Noah from Supreme Nutrition, I believe, does not like it at all in any situation because it can be hard to clear. So I think it just depends too on the person's overall burden. Like if they're more of like a heavy metal type, yeah, maybe that's not the best solution. But like my mom, for example, she had bronchitis, literally took like 3 antibiotics, nothing was touching it. We nebulized colloidal silver in a very, very small dose for like 2 days, and she was like better overnight. So I think it has a time and a place. Oh, I think this is yours.
Oh, this is also another symptom. So your eyes, your ability to see. So obviously we know that the back of the eye is the retina. It's closely connected to the health of the heart. So when you think about vision and how people start to lose vision as they age, why do you think that might be? The heart, right? Life can throw a lot of things your way. So there is a lot of connections between blindness causing eye diseases that are tied to the cardiovascular system. For example, the blockage that can occur in the vein. And there's also something called wet macular degeneration, which can occur when abnormal blood vessels leak fluid into the retina, which can cause blurry vision and blind spots in the vision. So that can also be connected to the health of your cardiovascular system. This is one of my all-time favorite quotes, and it's a quote from C.S. Lewis, which he's one of my all-time favorite authors. And I feel like it's just applicable when it comes to the heart and this journey. But I agree with this wholeheartedly. Mental pain is less dramatic than physical pain, but it is more common and also more hard to bear. The frequent attempt to conceal mental pain increases the burden. It is easier to say my tooth is aching than to say my heart is broken. And I could not agree with this more, because I think that, hey, Sparrow, you gotta stop, buddy. It's a lot easier to just say, I want to take a supplement for the infection than it is to say, I'm going to sit for an hour every morning and I'm going to journal and I'm going to process, or I'm going to go speak through things that have really hurt me. But often that's the thing that has to take place for us to even overcome a lot of the physical burdens and physical pains and irregularities of the heart. I think I told you all this story, but after my dad walked through some trauma and some things, his resting heart rate decreased almost back to normal. And he's had a high heart rate his whole life. So I absolutely believe that that plays a role in the bigger picture of the cardiovascular system. But unfortunately, someone could be dealing with trauma or a broken heart or just a lot going on. And so they show up to the doctor, their blood pressure is high, their heart rate's high. Maybe they run some blood lab markers and say, hey, we need to put you on a statin. That's our quote solution. But it's the furthest thing from a solution because of all the repercussions it causes. So first and foremost, it depletes CoQ10. CoQ10 is an absolute essential nutrient for your heart and your mitochondrial function. So when you deplete CoQ10, you've now created mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, when you have mitochondrial dysfunction, everything else downstream from that becomes an issue, because your mitochondria is the batteries for your body. So we are seeing a ton of people with insulin resistance on statins, like lots of it. And then with insulin resistance, that now increases the risk for diabetes, which increases the risk for heart disease. The reason that we preach on blood sugar so much and making that a non-negotiable thing to try to balance is because it is a predictor. Like the number one thing it causes is cardiovascular disease, which is why lowering stress, balancing blood sugar, optimizing nutrients, those three things alone, when you work on stress and trauma, can decrease the risk of a lot of these really scary things like cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart disease, heart attack, stroke, all of that. And the whole reason most are put on a statin to begin with is to reduce the risk, which all it's doing is actually increasing the risk. So not a fan of statins at all.
Another thing that's cool about statins that I didn't really know until I worked in the clinic, because our demographic was older, you can actually do a genetic test. I'm trying to remember exactly the markers that they look at, but you can do a genetic test to find out if your body is even going to be able to handle a statin, because there's a lot of people that will have very negative side effects from that. And they'll bruise easily, they'll have, edema. There's, a lot of complications that can come with that. And genetically, some people are not going to do well with that. So it's mostly probably for people's parents going through this, I would imagine. But that was one thing I was like, non-negotiable. If you're even considering this, we do the genetic stuff to make sure your body can even handle it. And let's hope that it doesn't, because then that's like a consideration that most people don't even think about.
Yeah. Well, and I've shared this before in my course, but when you really go down the deep dive, you realize how corrupt things is, because there's 9 doctors, who write the National Cholesterol Guidelines, and they receive money.
Yeah.
8 of the 9, that's almost 100%, receive money from the pharmaceutical industry. And 2/3 of all medical research is funded by the pharmaceutical companies. So when you really think about it, it comes down to power and money, because the market for statin drugs, Dr. Will Cole speaks to this all the time on posts and podcasts, is the largest drug company in the world. Statin drugs, largest drug company in the world. And so instead of them saying, when your cholesterol is high, hey, let's run a full thyroid panel, they're like, hey, here's a statin, which the thyroid's dysfunctional and it's decreasing mitochondria, which is why cholesterol elevates to begin with. And then they make more money on these statins that cause more issues and actually can increase the risk of heart disease down the road and cause a need for more medication. So it's a whole mess.
If you are like not a practitioner and your mom, well, this is the situation. My mom's on a whole list of meds, and she, at first I thought I couldn't figure out what was going on, but now we've definitely narrowed it down. But honestly, because of some TikTok reels that I've seen, that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what's going on with my mom. And in her case, I think gabapentin and what was the other one I just said? Ozempic, which is why she's lost all kinds of weight. She's on that for diabetes. The point is, she's on a list of meds, and I'm flying to Pennsylvania to get on her HIPAA forms so that the doctor can even talk to me, because technically they're not allowed. But I mean, you can't just take them off these meds. Like, I know there's all kinds of support groups on Facebook for people trying to get off of gabapentin, which is Neurontin. And also Lyrica, I guess, is just like it. But I guess, do you have any advice? Like, what can you say to the doctor? Because I can't just demand that she like gets taken off the meds, because obviously some of these things have to be weaned off of, but like, is there any sort of question you would ask or guidance?
I would not ask the doctor anything.
To be find another
Would you
doctor.
just like kind of,
Listen.
I was going to say, do you just like, and I've heard that this doctor's like a real jerk in regards to vaccines. So I can only imagine he's probably got a God complex. He's just a PCP.
Well,
But
here's what
I
I'll do.
mean,
I'll tell
I know
you.
you're not taking on patients.
I know. I'll tell you what I would do. I would
Okay.
see if my parent was even willing to get off the medication, because to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of people aren't willing to. They want the Band-Aid, and it's hard when it's your loved ones, but you can't help people who don't want to be helped. Because if your mom gets off the medication, she's going to have to do 100% commitment to lifestyle changes, dietary changes, supplemental protocols. Like, that's just the reality of it when they've gotten to that place. And they have to be willing to want to work with someone. So, there's tons of people who've gone through the blood chemistry course. They probably run comprehensive labs, but she herself has to want to be willing, because doctors are not going to help you. They just won't. Like, they're going to literally, they're going to gaslight you and make you and your mom feel like if you do this, you will die. This is the only solution.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm afraid of. My husband's like, I'm just afraid that you're like wasting your time and money going there. But at this point, all I know is I have to go to get her to sign paperwork legally anyway. So that's really why I'm going. But it's just the side effects. I'm like, she is literally like, I don't even recognize, I can't even have a conversation with her. And everybody in her life says that too. And it's just side effects from these stupid meds. But okay, sorry, that was off topic. It all started because she did have like cardiovascular. She had a surgery for a bypass, essentially. So yeah, interesting timing. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Markel even said it in the chat too. Like, it's so hard with family members, but they truly like have to want to change, because they're not like, they're used to going into the doctor and saying, I have a toothache. What's the solution? And they're given a medication. And so that's all they're conditioned to know. And doctors, that's all they're conditioned to train on, unless they have gone down rabbit holes like Lauren Johnson, who was in that system and her eyes were opened up to the corruption of it and went a different direction. But I think a lot of us probably in this chat could say like, yeah, a doctor told me that I would be, dealing with XYZ forever. Like, I had a doctor flat out tell me liver transplant is your only option and yearly vaccinations. And I was like, we're not going that route. So I think that every single person can probably relate to something of that. And yeah, there's a lot of people who aren't even allowed to promote anything that isn't standard care in a hospital setting, or they could get their license revoked. I mean, it's a whole thing, right? They also have families to feed, and they're in a ton of debt from school. So the whole system, it's not healthcare, it's sick care at this point, and it drives a lot of money. That's for sure.
I mean, really, like,
Go ahead.
I would say the only thing you could do, because this could apply to literally anybody in your family that doesn't necessarily like, maybe they don't know better, but it's just to like flood them with resources if they're willing and open to learning more, because it's not going to be until they really learn and be like, oh, okay, now I get it, that they're going to actually want to make a change. And sometimes I find too, with like an older demographic or parents, it's like, this isn't their world, or like, I try and remind myself that a lot, even with my husband, that like, this isn't his world. Like, he doesn't get it the way that I get it, like we have to kind of sometimes, unfortunately, meet them where they're at too. And so like, if she in her own body feels safe on the statin, thinking, okay, maybe this is going to save my life, then like, going back to that stress piece, if that's giving her peace of mind, support her with the symptoms, you know, like it is a Band-Aid and it is what it is. But I feel like it's just so hard sometimes with parents and things like that to really like completely just overhaul their care. It's like Em said, they have to want to do it, but sometimes if, you know, maybe they feel safer doing what they're doing and they trust pharmaceuticals, and that's kind of okay, I guess. Like it's their life and their body, where there's only so much we can do. We can't totally take responsibility for it all the time. And so, you know, maybe that's where her stress levels feel better.
Yeah.
If somebody like is open to wanting to change, probably not going to be my mom, but I do have friends that are like natural, like curious or whatever, but they are currently seeing a doctor. Like I know you guys don't take on new patients really, but like what would I suggest? Like get an integrative health practitioner or something like that. Like just tell them that.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. All right. Thank you.
So this slide is some of the warning signs of like heart disease, and they're pretty obvious. So swelling is a big one. Swelling of extremities, that's the official name for this, is edema. So many diseases of the heart can cause fluid to build up in the feet and lower legs. Discoloration, this could be of the skin, or it could be even like a pattern, like a blue or purple net-like pattern. That could be a blocked artery, whereas more of like a blue-purple tint can be a blockage in a blood vessel. And then the nails, it's called clubbing. So when the nails start to sort of curve downward at the ends of the fingers, or the ends of the fingers are swollen, that is a sign of heart disease. A gray ring around the colored part of your eye. Changes to the tongue. If y'all look up Chinese medicine tongue analysis, you'll see all the different parts that are connected to the heart, where it's like color changes, when it turns like really red, when it swells. All those things can help point to heart stuff. So favorites for the heart. Nervous system support is going to be massively, 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 massively huge in working through that. Optimizing diet and exercise. Always go back to the basics. With any of these organs, as complex as they seem, go back to the basics. Track blood sugar, focus on boundaries, breath work, sunshine, eat good food, surround yourself with good people, move your body, go for walks, right? Like get off social media if you need. That's going to play probably the biggest role. And then supplementally, CoQ10 is great. PC and balance oil from Body Bio. I know we speak to that a lot, but that's so important for building and keeping the structure of the cell membranes. We've talked about them being like castle walls, and the balance holds the bricks together. And PC is those actual building blocks. It also helps export the things that we talked about that can influence the heart. And then Supreme Nutrition has quite a few broad spectrum herbs that are really great. So I love Vital Guard Supreme. We've talked about that before. It's safe for pregnancy and breastfeeding. There's not any like side effects of it, but it's chrysanthemum flowers, which have cardioprotective mechanisms. So if you have someone in your life that has some of these heart symptoms or some blood work markers that aren't great, this slide is what I would have them on. If it was like, well, this slide and then some of the next slide. But Dan Shen can be really great for helping reduce the development of atherosclerosis. So for the people in our life that are like, yeah, I'm not giving up that food, I'm not giving up that alcohol, I want to live my life, I'd be like, okay, you're going to be on Dan Shen Supreme. You're going to be on Vital Guard Supreme. You're going to be on CoQ10, because you've got to offset some of those lifestyle choices. I also have my parents on reishi. My mom, my stepdad, and my dad are all on reishi spores and drinking coffee. This has historically been used to help with heart disease. They've even been able to reduce like stroke type related issues with it as well. So I love reishi. And then you have some other herbs that are great. So astragalus is great. Cat's claw is great. Schisandra, great. L-carnitine, and then vitamins and minerals, which is the next slide. We go over the slide now. Okay.
Yeah. So B1 we talked about, that was the congestive type, enhances circulation and brain function, and lack of B1 can lead to heart failure. B12 aids in optimal red blood cell development, also can help lower blood pressure. So with any of these though, remember this is like broad recommendations. So like what type of B12, it's going to depend on the person, things like that. Folate along with other B vitamins help breaks down homocysteine. And that is really kind of helping to protect that inner wall of the arteries. Proper heart rhythm is reliant on 4 minerals, which is calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. So think of minerals, electrolytes, adding to your water. Calcium is important for normal blood viscosity, and magnesium strengthens the heartbeat and improves calcium utilization. So kind of like that uptake or cofactor. So when in balance, CalMag regulates the blood viscosity and helps prevent clotting. Potassium helps keep your heart beating at the right pace. Sodium is needed for voltage. Kind of like we said, the heart is like electrically charged. The voltage gated sodium channels, they're also in the outer membranes of the cardiac cells, but they're important for initiating the action and triggering contractions of the cardiac muscle and fiber. So keeping like the actual contractions. Vitamin D, which is obviously going to be helpful in uptaking calcium and phosphorus. B6 is needed to retain magnesium. Vitamin E is known as a powerful blood thinner. Vitamin K is used to assist in clotting proteins, also helps uptake that vitamin D. So you'll see some vitamin D that has the K in it. And then too much or too little iron can also cause heart problems. Copper, vitamin A, and vitamin C can all play a role in how iron is used and absorbed. So again, kind of like that vitamin C we talk about as being like a cofactor for the body to actually use iron, which is going to be then in the end kind of your ferritin stores, in addition to all the other markers that we look at when it comes to healthy iron levels.
Yeah, and then what we talked about earlier, type 2 people, right? Too much or too little iron can cause heart problems. So that's what we were talking earlier about, the different types of people and what's needed. And so it might not be like, hey, you're taking in too little or eating too much iron, but you may not have sufficient copper, vitamin A, or vitamin C, which helps with strengthening the vein walls, but also how iron is used and absorbed in the body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to read these. I just wanted y'all to have them. It's the top food sources of those 4 key minerals needed for the proper function of the heart. So calcium is a really, really, really important one. The details on it of symptoms of calcium imbalance and its exact role are there. And then kind of the goal that y'all are looking for. So you'll have this PowerPoint slide. Kids need slightly more. Think about it. Calcium helps build what? Your bones. Kids, as they're growing, have bones that are growing. So they're obviously going to need slightly more. Now, what's really interesting about calcium is cortisol, high stress, blocks the calcium from entering the bones. So not only is that going to influence the heart, because if calcium can't enter the bones, calcium is lingering outside of where it needs to be, which will then go and interact with the calcium voltage gated channels and magnesium, the rhythm of the heart. Calcium is critical for the regulation of the contraction and the relaxation. So if we are stressed and we do not have calcium getting into the bones, we do not now have the proper amount, because it's all about amount, for contraction and relaxation. Hydrochloric acid is also needed to absorb calcium. So if you're a type 1 person, like we talked about earlier, and you're naturally running lower in HCl, B vitamins are essential. Those are absolutely critical for making enough HCl, and that's needed to absorb your calcium levels. Here's magnesium. So it's for the coordinating activity of the cardiac muscles. Signs are listed. The daily magnesium goal, that should say, I think, is it 420 milligrams? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's about right. So that's your daily magnesium goal for adults. You can always track it via the Chronometer app. And then magnesium sources, we've got a lot here, but hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, lima beans, black beans, mackerel, cacao, avocado, and then supplemental if you want to supplement. Sodium. So most people, they'll say like, hey, you need to avoid salt, right? Like that's like a common thing in our parents' age. Like, no, I need to restrict my salt. And it's because most of that salt is processed and not mineral rich, and minerals work with one another. So Dr. James, his thing on Instagram has like 1 million+ followers. And for some reason, we don't know why, Allie and I laugh, he follows all of our brands. Like he follows our account and Root Cause Formula and Core Formulas. And I don't know why, because he doesn't follow that many people, but it's really funny. He's got a lot of great stuff, and he's done a ton of great research and supports Ari Light. If y'all drink the electrolyte power Ari Light, he's a huge like founder and contributor to that. But his research points that optimum sodium intake is around 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams per day on non-workout days. And if you're working out or in a sauna, 5,000 to 7,000 milligrams. This is why I think when people add in like some adrenal cocktails and sea salt to their water, way more than they were previously, they're like, I feel so much better. So I don't think people get enough true sea salt, and they think it's going to make them swell and retain water. It's the opposite. Usually you need more. So Ari Light, super helpful for the nervous system and for the heart and the cardiac muscle fibers. So salt obviously is great. We put on there Redmond's Crucial 4 Premier Research as some good options. And seafood and bone broth has naturally occurring sodium as well.
Do we know why? Like, you know that like high fat, well, the old school of thought, and people still think this, is that fat is going to cause heart issues and heart attacks and things. But I swear in the older population, or just like mainstream, people are like, oh, I'm reducing my salts because my sodium is going to cause my blood pressure to increase. And my doctor says I need to for my cholesterol. Like, I don't understand that. Like, literally, it's just like there's never any science to that. And it's one of those things you constantly still hear. Like my brother-in-law, who is actually, I think, younger than I am by like a year. So he's like, what, like 36? He's like, oh yeah, I'm cutting out salt and meat. And I'm like,
Yeah, I don't know.
why would you do that? He was like,
Yeah.
well, you know, my cholesterol's high, my blood pressure's not great. And I was like, I mean, aside from the fact that I have like 1,000 questions, like, who told you that? Like, why is this a thing? I don't understand. It's like, it's shocking to me, because you look at that and you say, this is the RDA or the RDV and the value that you need. It's a lot. You need a lot of salt.
I know.
I just
know.
like, it drives me insane.
I know. I pound the salt. I'm like, here's a tablespoon in my water for the day. We use a lot of salt.
It blows my mind. I was like, okay, so you're not going to eat the salt in the meat, but you are going to do the scotch and the bread then. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so potassium, this is the next one. I think this and magnesium. Oh, we already went over magnesium. So this is the last one of the heart. So this is what keeps it beating at the right pace. Potassium is one of the things that we see on blood work that's above 4.5, which means it's in the blood, not in the cell where it's needed. And also it's one that tends to be very low in hair tissue mineral analysis tests, because people burn through their potassium alongside their B6 when they are stressed. So with potassium specifically, you need a balanced level with sodium to protect against stroke and heart disease. It is absorbed through the gut, removed by the kidneys. So if you have gut dysfunction or kidney filtration issues, you're going to have issues with potassium as well. And if you don't have enough sodium, you will not have proper potassium, because it's all about a pump. So one goes in, one comes out, one goes in, one goes out. And when you do not have sufficient levels, this is going to disrupt the electrical signals of the myocardium, which is the middle layer of the heart muscle. So if it's too high or too low, you now have an irregular heartbeat. Daily goal is around 3,500 to 4,700 milligrams. I eat potatoes like they're the greatest food on earth. And the reason why is because they are so high in potassium. Good old fashioned potatoes, red potatoes, yellow potatoes, russet potatoes. I like them more than sweet potatoes. They have the highest source of potassium. They're so good for you. I also don't know if this is true, but I would not doubt it, because when I started researching potatoes, I'm like, these have so many nutrients and minerals in them. But a diet of potatoes and butter, I think, gives you almost every single nutrient your body needs, minus like a few key amino acids. So I found that fascinating. So potatoes, acorn, butternut squash, salmon, mushrooms, ground beef, bone broth, coconut water, and the Pink Label liquid brand of organic aloe vera juice. So is sodium, potassium inversely related? Not necessarily inversely related. You want a delicate balance between both. So on an HTMA, you want them both in the optimal ranges, not too low. And on blood, if people are stressed, they tend to see low sodium, high potassium. In chronic stress, more acute adrenal stress, you tend to see peeing out the potassium, so lower potassium, higher sodium. Oh, most people, if y'all, this is my challenge for y'all this week. I want you to track in Chronometer your food and see how much potassium you get, because most people are nowhere near 3,500. Nowhere near. You got to be real good about eating these foods in order to hit 3,500. I'd say most people are getting like 800 milligrams of potassium. I use Chronometer to track. It gives you like all the micronutrients. That's my favorite. All right. I know we're going a little bit over. The lungs is a lot shorter than the heart, but we'll go through this a little bit quicker, and y'all can always go back and read some of these slides. So the lungs make oxygen available to the body and can also remove gases such as carbon dioxide. This process takes place around 12 to 20 times per minute. So here's another picture of the lungs. You've got lobes to them. You have a right lung lobe and a left lung lobe, and then you have different chambers of the lungs. So you have inferior, superior in the left lung, upper, lower, essentially. And then in the right lung, you have the middle lobe as well as the superior and inferior as well. I think that the other lung lobe on the right side is just on the back end. Okay, y'all can come back to that slide. There's obviously the different cartilage parts of it, but here's a list of like a bunch of different imbalances that can impact the lungs. So obviously y'all have probably heard of some of them. If you're living in a moldy home, mold and mycotoxins can affect the lungs, your immune and breathing, but typically it impacts the sinuses more. And when it colonizes in the sinuses, you can't get as good of a breath, which means that you're not getting the cleansing aspect. So a lot of times people think the lungs are the biggest thing that it attacks, but it doesn't. It's more likely to impact the sinuses, and then impacted sinuses can therefore impact the lungs. Some Lyme bacteria and parasites like Babesia and Bartonella can also affect breathing and lung function. We know Babesia can cause air hunger, inflammation, chronic coughs. That could also be viral. Asthma is not an underlying lung problem. Everyone thinks that asthma is a lung problem. It's not. It's a deeper-rooted gut problem and an immune problem that's driving inflammation. It tightens those airways, but it's not a lung problem. So we'll go over that in a little bit more. Bronchitis, however, is a contributor to asthma. Bronchitis can be caused, and that's the main characteristic of that, is coughing. It can be acute or chronic from underlying bacterial or viral loads. COPD, this is a progressive breathing disorder. It says that it can't be reversed. However, do you want to know one of the best things for COPD? We'll get to it here in a little bit. It is, where's my slide on it? Oh, y'all are just seeing all the things.
Propolis.
What?
Is it propolis?
Propolis is good, but NAC. And what are they trying to remove from the shelves post-COVID? I'm telling y'all, the agenda. It's very
Yeah.
obvious. They're trying to
And
do.
some of these, like, yeah, so some of these we copied from, like, you know, medical things that, of course, that's why it says it can't be.
Well, and we have another slide showing how corrupt the medical system is with this. It's bad.
Right. So yeah, I didn't even see that it said that, but it's funny because the two that like most of these I just kept because it's like I wanted to see like, okay, which ones are ones that like mesothelioma, I can't even say it, mesothelioma, like things like that. But the ones that were not on here, of course, the ones that we added were mold and Lyme because those were not on here. But it's not uncommon in our world, but it's common, or it's not, you know what I'm saying? It's not uncommon in our world, but
yeah. If you were to go to a doctor, they would not have mold or Lyme or bacteria listed. They would say, hey, there is cystic fibrosis, or there is COPD, or there is pneumonia, or there is RSV, which are just blanket diagnoses for there's something deeper going on, usually bacterial, viral. These are two of the most common ones. So when I was talking about asthma earlier, the reason I had asthma as a kid, and it's so funny, you look back in time and you're like, oh my gosh, I had an inhaler from age 4 to age 13. And I also had my tonsils removed. And I also had streptococcus and strep throat 24/7. So when you dig to the root, no, asthma is not a root cause. Asthma is a byproduct of something deeper. And usually it's caused by phlegm, which post-COVID, a lot of people have excess phlegm that results from weakened spleen, which we've talked about spleen with the immune system, and kidneys, which removes soluble toxins and it needs proper electrolytes. So those are absolutely essential in things like asthma. Usually it's a kidney deficiency in Chinese medicine where the kidneys are not getting enough support. So strep infections, and that can include strep throat. It can include pneumonia. It can cause sinus infections, a lot of other conditions in the body, swollen tonsils, swollen lymph nodes, streptococcus in the gut. Then you go with a strep throat, what are they going to give you? Antibiotics, which wipes out all the good gut flora as a kid. And now you're going to constantly be dealing with immune dysregulation, Th1, Th2 shifts, because they gave you an antibiotic that wiped out the bacteria that your body should be able to handle on its own. So instead, if you were to just support the kidneys, support the spleen, use the lung supports, we'll go over here in a second, then asthma goes away. And bronchitis is the other one. Another thing that Chinese medicine practitioners will say and believe is that the primary organ that's tied to your skin health is the lungs, and the large intestine is involved because it has a marked impact on lung function. So again, if you look up face mapping, you'll notice the lungs is right here. When acne and breakouts, not necessarily on the cheek, but kind of if you were to draw a line from the outside of your mouth up to your ear, that's sort of where the lungs are, and your lungs and your large intestines influence one another. So again, going back to this idea of streptococcus in the gut, that can influence and cause things like asthma. A lot of dysbiosis in the large intestine can actually impact breathing mechanisms. So that could, look like a bunch of different symptoms of lungs, whether it's shortness of breath, chronic cough, fatigue, weakness in the voice, tendency to catch colds, asthma, lung disorders, weak digestion, mucus producing foods can also cause problems. Dr. Klinghardt is the one who's really spoken about most, like the unexplained or unproductive cough, which a lot of people post-COVID have this. And I always wonder, like, is it inflammation or is it an underlying thing like Bartonella that's come to the surface? So things like Babesia, why does it cause air hunger? It can live largely in the lungs. So what's Babesia? It's a blood-borne parasite. So then what do we need in order for the heart to pump healthy blood? So Dr. Buhner, he has like a whole mold-based protocol and Lyme-based protocol, but says that he tends to see coughing more commonly with Bartonella than Borrelia, Lyme disease. So experiencing something like a long-term cough, which I am 100% convinced that my aunt has Bartonella because she has every symptom of it, but they have her on a buttload of antibiotics and medications, and she doesn't want to get off of them, but she's had a chronic cough for years and has literally every symptom of a Bartonella infection. Like,
Have you done her blood work too to see the pattern?
Yes, and it's all Bartonella patterns, all of it.
Remember that other client that I had sent you to look at her blood work? An older client, but this unproductive cough that literally has been for like 10 years. And we both were like, oh my gosh, it's a Lyme co-infection. And she's been to thousands and thousands and thousands of doctors.
It's Bartonella.
Yeah, I know. I remember. And we were like, I even sent so someone asked back in the chat earlier about different Lyme symptoms. That Rawls PDF that's like 10 pages long is my absolute favorite Lyme just resource, because it goes over, it has the body that's like in different purples and pinks and stuff, and it has all those shootouts of different symptoms, and then next to the very like specific ones that are like more so Bartonella, more so Babesia, they have a star or asterisk next to it. Anyways, that's a great resource. It's in our resource library, but you look at that and it has unproductive cough, and it was like literally all of those things, and her same neutrophils, lymph patterns all lined up to it.
Yeah.
It's just, it's so interesting that's like,
Yeah.
but still people, for whatever reason, choose not to believe that's what it is. Like, okay,
No.
you heard it here first.
So here's another example of the internet. This is why you have to be so careful about Google, y'all. And like, it creates so much fear, but there's always an agenda at play. There's always an agenda at play. And I'm not saying that either of these resources are 100% accurate or 100% wrong. I just want to bring and shed light to how like it's not the same information across the board. So this was a 2022 study, and this was done shortly after COVID, when, I don't know if y'all remember, everyone was nebulizing hydrogen peroxide, and sometimes they were adding iodine to it because it can kill the virus. And this was one of many, plenty of studies show like use of hydrogen peroxide in a nebulizer can minimize viral contaminations, can help with it decreasing exposure and spreading it and all these things. Dr. Jockers has an incredible article you can go look up on Google. That's the name of it, Nebulizing Hydrogen Peroxide for Respiratory Health. Incredible article, lists all these things. But when you go to search on Google, look at the first two things that come up. Danger, don't nebulize hydrogen peroxide and breathe it in. Yet look at who it comes from. Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. And I can promise you that they are paid from pharmaceutical companies based on asthma albuterol inhalers because it is a prescription to have an inhaler. Then you have fact checkers, which we've learned in the past few years that fact checkers don't know a whole lot. Fact checked inhaling hydroperoxide iodine unsafe. And then you literally have the PubMed study third proving that it works. So just real frustrating, and why I don't have a doctor in the medical field. Okay, so top favorite supports for lungs, obviously treating nasal passages and underlying infections going to be big. PC and Body Bio or Body Bio PC, Balance Oil, those are going to help just because the lungs are made up, I think, of 80% their properties of PC. So it really helps like lubricate them and keep things moving and going. Nebulizing using different agents, especially with COVID, if it gets in the lungs, vitamin A can help get the crud out of the lungs. Vitamin C, vitamin D, those are helpful. Think about when you get a virus, it's most likely to impact the lungs, what you use to help. NAC, again, used to improve COPD, but everything you look at in the medical field is COPD cannot be reduced or cannot stop lung decline. Yes, it can. Reishi, this aids in improving oxygen utilization. So super cool story about Reishi. By the way, the reason why I cannot speak to Reishi in the way I want to online is because of the FDA. And they will come in and say you're making medical and health claims, and they will shut down our company. So they have their eyes on me at the moment because lots of reasons. But the powder,
Emily's the boss, and
No.
and Organo is largely dependent on Emily's success. It's okay, we can say it. You're
no,
doing
it's not that. It's because it's more like a medical based team, essentially.
it.
So but anyways, there are so many cool stories of what Reishi's done in acute cases. So one of Dr. Bob's good friends, I met them when I was in Houston several years before meeting him. He's a paramedic and he was on an airplane. And one of the flight attendants, when they were like off at their layover, went and bought new makeup at MAC. And she had never bought this makeup before. She was like, ooh, I'm going to get this new makeup. And so she was putting it on while they were in the air, in the bathroom, putting on the MAC makeup. Well, she started having an anaphylactic reaction to this makeup and her airways started closing. And so they were going to do a emergency landing, and he ran back there and sprinkled our King coffee in her throat, and it completely opened up her airways and stopped the anaphylactic. She was able to breathe just from sprinkling King coffee into her throat and then putting water in her mouth and her swallowing it. So
Dr.
I
Bob
can't,
did this?
no, one of Dr. Bob's good friends, when I went to that
Okay.
camp several years ago, he's a paramedic and he was there and he was telling me this story. And like, I believe it, right? Because I've seen what it does to heart rate variability, especially at high doses. But Reishi's incredible with people who snore, improving oxygen utilization. That's the biggest thing my mom said with my stepdad is like, I'm shocked because my stepdad takes our products. Rick doesn't snore as bad as he used to. And I think that that's a large reason why. So Reishi is one of my all-time favorite supports for the lungs. I know that when people had COVID, they high dosed it, that and melatonin, and they were able to clear it super, super fast. And then more acute supports, aside from the grapes at the bottom, would be other things that could be helpful and more acute. So quercetin and iodine are really great. Ashwagandha astragalus, mullein, Romania, burdock, chamomile, those are often in teas. Osha root, I discovered Osha root after COVID. It's used sort of in Native American medicine, which if you ever want to like learn about remedies for key things, go on Google, and you have to use parentheses or Google will censor you. But if you put Native American medicine in parentheses, and then you put in parentheses whatever you're trying to help, respiratory disease, cancer, cardiovascular problems, whatever it is, they're brilliant. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant. So Osha root is amazing. It's also called bear root, and it can treat a ton of ailments that have to do with the lungs and the heart, like across the board. So really like Osha root. Ginger, licorice, peppermint, those like in tea forms can be really good because they soothe the throat. CBD can be great. And grape clusters. So when you look at grape clusters, they resemble lung alveoli, and so they can help protect the lungs. They contain specific flavonoids that are critical for maintaining lung function as you age. So grapes are A+ when it comes to lung support. Okay, so moving into real quick, let me stop share. I'm going to go over some key things with y'all on disorders. So living in mold, this is obviously a big one. This is going to cause respiratory toxicity. You breathe it in through the nasal passages, it impacts the lungs. It causes pulmonary type situations, whether it's edema or brain fog or all the mold and mycotoxin symptoms we've talked about. But it could also be like toxicity in breathing in other substrates that can harm animals and humans. I think of like Bath and Body Works. You leave and you never feel good. You feel like your throat's literally burning. Usually it's prolonged exposure though, usually from water damaged buildings. And that can lead to over time things like pulmonary fibrosis because of how it impacts the lungs, which can then lead to things down the road like sleep apnea. So with sleep apnea, this is a really common thing that I feel like a lot of men deal with. With sleep apnea, it's typically lung and spleen that are impacted. And it usually is people who worry and ruminate about the past. That is sleep apnea. So how to support it is obviously supporting what's stressing the spleen, the lung supports, but some other things that can really help specifically with sleep apnea is chamomile, which is in our gut makeover, by the way. Think about what we said with the gut and the lung connection. You support the gut, you support the lungs. Chamomile is in there. It also helps dispel gas and wind from the gut. The second thing is thyme, THYME. This can help strengthen the lungs and eliminate phlegm. And then the third would be astragalus. So those are going to be the three best ones for sleep apnea. Next common one, which always surprises people that can be a lung disorder, is psoriasis.
Yeah.
So psoriasis is an autoimmune disease. It causes sort of like the red plaques on the skin. It flares with stress and immune impairment. So we saw a lot of people with psoriasis flares after COVID or after a really stressful event. It can also happen through hormonal changes, gut issues, difficulty digesting, nutrient deficiencies, impaired liver function. So there's lots of things that can contribute, but in the traditional side of medicine, psoriasis is largely caused from the lungs. And it's triggered by usually unhealed emotional wounds. So when you think of even COVID and what that caused, if someone had an emotional wound of being isolated or not seen or not heard or feeling like they needed to be masked their whole life and couldn't speak up, it could flare something like psoriasis. So what's super interesting when I was researching psoriasis that can help it is Smilax, of all things, which is a ingredient that they use as a binder for mold from Supreme Nutrition, because it helps clear the dampness and it decreases inflammation. And then the second thing that's really helpful is marshmallow root. Kind of helps moisten the lungs and colon. Marshmallow root is also in a lot of like leaky gut supports. I think it's also in like some H. pylori supports, isn't it, Allie? Marshmallow?
Marshmallow and slippery elm are the kind of two that are common for H. pylori, but marshmallow is for some, yeah.
Yeah. So those are the kind of the top two supports when it comes to psoriasis, when it's a lung thing. Okay. So next thing would be pneumonia. So usually with pneumonia, there is
sorry.
What?
I was typing cirrhosis, which is a liver condition.
Oh.
Psoriasis is yes, the
Psoriasis.
PSR. Yeah, sorry,
Psoriasis.
not to be confused.
But pneumonia, this is the one that's always funny with the silent P. Usually it is caused by viral or bacterial. It impacts the lungs. Usually with pneumonia, it can develop really fast. So most people end up going to the hospital because pneumonia can be deadly. So from an ancient perspective, one of the biggest root causes of pneumonia is lung problems. Usually there's a dampness in the lungs, and the emotion that's sort of correlated with that is unprocessed grief. So pneumonia, viral or bacterial, unprocessed grief can influence it. The supports for this, one of the top ones is going to be astragalus again, which is one of our favorite supports for bacteria in general. Another one is going to be elderberry. Elderberry is very common to find, and I think that Supreme Nutrition just came out with their own elderberry not too long ago that I really like. So those are going to be top ones for pneumonia. Obviously, if it's really severe, we need to go to the hospital and the doctor, but that can help. Okay, next one is depression. People are always shocked when I say depression's a lung thing, but think about that for a second. Think about what depression is and what it causes. It causes low mood, it causes low energy, it can create sadness, anger, sleep issues, whether they don't sleep at all or they're sleeping too much, can have certain thoughts that come into the brain that are not healthy, good thoughts, loss of appetite, loss of libido, just feeling run down and in the blues. Well, the root of that, in addition to the heart, is the lungs. And it tends to be made worse when someone is continuing to dwell on the past without a present lack of hope and joy in their life. So it's two of those side by side. I'm dwelling on a situation from the past that's not mended, and I don't have a present lack and joy to walk with me day to day. So when it comes to depression, obviously the nervous system is going to play a massive role. So anything that supports stress in general is going to help, but we also want to support the lungs. So with this specifically, one of the things that's most important is cellular health. PC, balanced oil, omega-3 fatty acids, as well as adaptogens like ETAS and rhodiola rosea. So those are going to be top supports. If you can handle nightshades, ashwagandha can be a good one too. And then I think they also have their Albizia, which has been shown for, that's more of a Xanax-like effect for anxiety, but I think it can help with depression. And then L-tyrosine has been said to be helpful too for depression, which is an amino acid. Okay, I think I've got a few more. The next one is lupus. And what do we typically think of with lupus? Which organ? What do they correlate lupus with? Anybody know? It's an immune dysfunction, but no, not low energy, not thyroid, not heart. It weighs you down. What was the organ that weighs you down? No, the liver. Lupus is a disease.
No
of the
other
liver.
organs left.
It's like, okay, process of elimination here. Okay, so liver is like the one that is predominantly always talked about when it comes to lupus. But the cause of lupus before the liver is actually the lungs. Hence why we're talking about the lungs right now. And it's usually one of two emotional things. Just chronic stress and toxic emotions that have not been dealt with, or similarly worrying about the past, living in the past, walking in your life based upon things from the past. So notice a lot of keywords with the lungs: past, going back in your history, going back to things that haven't been dealt with. So that, as well as liver supports, can be helpful for this one. So all of the lung supports, all the liver supports, but predominantly the emotional side of things is good for lupus.
I feel like what's interesting, I mean, I don't know, we can take a poll, but like you were saying, it's all past emotions, past worry, ruminating on things.
Yep.
But like, I don't know. I mean, I, for one, am much more concerned and stressed out about the future more than I am the past. You know, I guess everyone is different depending on your life.
But I feel like future is more anxiety, worry.
Future more anxiety, worry
like-
versus
like
depression,
con-
anxiety.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so which organ systems relate to?
Yep.
future?
And a large reason why we worry about the future is because of things we haven't dealt with in our past.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Lack of control is a big
Sure.
one. Yeah. Okay. So anytime you see on blood work, low white blood cells, usually it's spleen and lungs, because when there is a weak immune system, it's obviously the lungs, in addition to the spleen, are struggling. So then when that goes on too long, you now have an autoimmune type reaction that takes place. Okay. We have several more. We've got allergies, and then parasites, and then one more. Okay, so allergies. We hear a lot about allergies like seasonal allergies, food allergies, environmental allergies, bee stings, pollen, dust, lactose, gluten, tyramine, blah, 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 blah. So there's lots of things. So why do we have allergies? Allergies, no, there's not slides for these. Allergies develop when the immune system is overreacting. That's essentially what allergies are. So if you have any of y'all ever outgrown an allergy as a kid, you're like, oh wait, when I was a kid, I was allergic to blank and I'm not allergic to it anymore. It's probably because your immune system gained some sort of intelligence to where you're not reacting to that specific thing anymore. Not to say you don't have any, but think about kids nowadays in schools. They have to be gluten-free, nut-free, dairy-free, nightshade-free, because these kids' immune systems, because their bucket is so overflowing, they're reacting to everything. It's like you can't go outside because you're allergic to horses and hay and dust. And, you know, when we see like these environmental allergy tests come back with people, and it's like all the things, all that's saying is your immune system's overreacting, essentially. And yeah, their solution is allergy shots. It's okay, Angeline. That's like everyone. I think my brothers had allergy shots growing up. I didn't because I didn't like needles as a kid. I'd pass out, or otherwise I probably would have had them too. Because I was allergic to everything under the sun: hay, dust, cats, dander, pollen, the sky, the grass. I'd break out in histamine rashes if I laid on the grass. It was bad. Okay, so then we have itchiness, red eyes, all the allergy type symptoms. So here, when we have allergies, it's a lung deficiency. So we go and support the lungs. We work on the things that help the lungs. And then we also support the immune system. So if you go back to the call we did with like the nervous system and the immune function, the thymus would be a good call to go back and listen to. Reishi, for example, that can help with allergies. Nettle, quercetin. Allie and I were even talking about this recently with like the histamine thing. I had to take a Zyrtec when I went to my aunt's house. I thought it was outside. It wasn't. Allie, you know why I ended up having to take a Zyrtec? Because we were going around the house and homegirl has Febreze plugins in every room. And so I'm like, no freaking wonder. I'm breathing in all this toxic crap. No wonder you have a chronic cough, lady, driving this Bartonella. So anyways, my immune system was not having it because I was like, what is this place? Here's the thing. Allergic responses are not bad. They're communicating, hey, something's up. It doesn't necessarily mean that your toxin bucket's overflowing if you don't experience it all the time. When it's like a once in a while, like if you walk into Bath and Body Works and you're like, I feel terrible. Your liver's not bad. It's just that your body's like, this is not something we want in our life. Like we need to get out of here ASAP. So all those things will help. All right, so parasites, this can also be a lung deficiency. There's also other things like spleen, kidneys, bladder, intestines, all those play a role. So you will support the lungs by taking antiparasitics. So when we have y'all on things like black walnut and Malia and golden thread and para 1 and para 2, you're inherently also supporting the lungs as you're supporting these parasites because they're creating this deficiency in the lungs. And watch also after you kill parasites, a lot of the acne that happens right here goes away, which is super cool. Okay, I think there was one more. Shingles. Okay, we'll end with shingles. So shingles, this was a very common thing we saw with COVID. My dad actually broke out in shingles after COVID. Shingles are actually caused from toxic heat that builds up. It causes stagnation in the liver and lungs. So stress is a major factor in shingles. So you have to ask the question, was COVID the stress or was the emotional turmoil of relationship division the stress that caused it? We don't know, right? We don't know. It could be either or. So when we're supporting this, my top supports are, again, astragalus, really great, and Vital Guard Supreme. Both of those are good. And then supporting kind of the nervous system and stressors in general will be helpful. All right, that's all the ones for now. There's several other, but they're not as common.
Yep.
Little did y'all know how much the lungs play a role.
Yeah. I typed out everything since it's not in the slides.
Yeah, there was too much for me to add all that to the slides earlier.
Yeah. Quite easy to
Okay.
read this way too.
So I'll upload those so y'all have them.
Yeah. I think every call we've done, we have most of the chat and almost all of them. So you guys can go back.
And next week is the mouth, oral. We are covering eyes, mouth, teeth, gums, and oral health next week. It'll be good. Which, speaking of, I'll tell y'all, this is a like little pre thing for next week. I'll find more info. But y'all know how I always like to be a guinea pig for all of you guys. if you didn't already know that, I'm a guinea pig. I never will ask y'all to do anything if I haven't done it myself. So I am going to get some information from my dentist. I was there today. I'm shocked I could talk today because my tongue was a little bit numb most of the day, because I am experimenting right now to see if instead of, granted, I didn't need surgery to begin with, but I had a little bit of stuff in an area in the lower part of my left jaw. And so some integrative dentists will, regardless of what it is, say like, let's go under the knife, let's do surgery. Let's, spend $15,000 on something that may or may not work. So what I'm having her do, and she doesn't do it very often, but I'm kind of making her, is Procaine and ozone injections with homeopathic injections to follow it actually into that site of my jaw, into the areas of all 4 spots that I had my wisdom teeth pulled out. Because not only does the wisdom teeth have an area that's a pocket, but your body remembers that as a traumatic experience. You're literally taking something out as a young kid and they're just stitching and sealing it up. So anyways, I will get more information on that and share with y'all next week, but I have had 2 treatments so far and have 4 more to go.
Which homeopathics did she say? Is it like a remedy specific? Is it like a blend?
She told me and I didn't know the name. It was not one I recognized.
Okay, but is it like addressing the trauma aspect?
Both.
Okay.
Both. It helps with the drainage of it. Like she said, don't be surprised if you need to use way more drainage remedies the next week. Yeah.
Cool.
But like the shots were like this, if you don't like needles, you don't like it. They're like this big. And I mean, they're injecting you like 3 or 4 times in one spot on each section.
Yeah. The more I learn about homeopathics, the more intrigued I am by them, truly. Like, it's just cool, the power that they have in terms of pulling things out and addressing emotions, addressing trauma, or addressing acute. It's just super cool. Someday, when I have more time in my life, I'm going to get certified in homeopathy for something.
Yeah, that'll be so cool.
Yeah.
You'll be good at it.
Yeah, it was when I mentioned it earlier, but the Dr. Seth's episode with Jody was talking about how they used homeopathy. There's actually a lot of people that say and speak very, very highly of using homeopathy for spectrum and autism. But pulling out each vaccine specifically that her son was injured with, using homeopathic remedies specifically, doing one at a time. It's just cool, the different capabilities that it has. And Angelica Lemke, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but I also listened to a really cool podcast episode with her. She's a really good resource for homeopathy. And she has courses and whatnot, books.
Well, there's some people that believe, and we'll go over it more next week on the specific protocols, that homeopathy over time alone can handle any sort of infection in the jaw.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, they don't have studies on that, but there's people that say that.
Yeah,
it's like 300 to 1M version over the course of X number of time with complementary formulas.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question that is kind of related. What homeopathies are good for nerve pain and any other things that are good for that? I like a injury type thing. I got stabbed by a cactus and I think it hit a nerve and I'm having like intense pain in my arm.
I mean, arnica is always my go-to.
Yeah.
I've been using that.
That's always one of my favorites.
Okay.
I mean, just because it's a plant. So I was actually talking to my chiropractor the other week and they have, I don't even know what kind of plant it was, some type of plant in their house, and their 1-year-old took a bite of the stem and all of a sudden his mouth was like on fire, like burning. And they used homeopathy and a bunch of other stuff, but it's almost like the same idea of like pulling out whatever that was. Like, I don't know if the actual cactus or plant potentially even had some type of impact on your body. I mean, you could figure out what pulls out something like bentonite, like putting bentonite clay like over the state.
Yeah.
Something like that to actually extract it could be something, not homeopathy, but
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And if I was a certified homeopath, I probably would have more answers for you, but until then, arnica for everything.
Chamomilla, calming the nervous system.
Chamomilla, arnica for everything, yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Perfect. All right. Well, y'all have a good week. We'll see y'all next week to cover eyes and mouth. Let us know if you need anything.
All right.
Bye,
And-
guys.